The room fell silent the moment General Varnak entered. It wasn't just respect that stilled the air, it was fear. The Zorthian Dominion had produced countless war heroes, but none like Varnak. He was a living legend, a conqueror whose name was whispered in both reverence and dread across the galaxy. His victories were so absolute, his strategies so devastating, that even his own people questioned whether he was still bound by the same rules of existence as the rest of them. And yet, as he strode through the war room of the Dominion High Command, there was something different about him today. Something unsettling. He carried no trophies, no spoils of war. His massive reptilian frame, scarred from countless battles, looked almost weary. And when he spoke, his deep, growling voice lacked its usual thunder. "I have seen something," he said, scanning the faces of his assembled officers. "Something that has changed everything I know about war." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Commander Zyril, one of Varnak's most trusted lieutenants, stepped forward, his chitinous carapace clicking with unease. "My general," Zyril said, his voice careful, respectful. "You speak as if you have faced an enemy unlike any before." Varnak turned his piercing yellow eyes upon him. "I have." Another murmur. The Zorthians had conquered over 100 worlds, battled species from every corner of the known galaxy. What could possibly unnerve General Varnak? Then he spoke the word that sent a chill through them all. "Humans?" The room tensed. The Terran species was a footnote in the Dominion's records. A primitive, pre-spacefaring civilization barely worth mentioning. When their scouts had first encountered the planet called Earth, it had been dismissed as a low-priority target. Its people were physically unimpressive, smaller, weaker than most of the galaxy's dominant species. Yet here stood General Varnak, speaking of them as if they were something to be feared. Commander Zyril hesitated before responding. "You encountered their forces? Their weapons?" Varnak's jaw tightened. His four-clawed hand flexed as if remembering something. "I did not face their armies," he said. "I did not see their fleets." He took a slow step forward, his voice darkening. "I only saw a handful of them. And it was enough." Silence. Then Subcommander Tilrek, one of the younger officers, let out a scoff. "My general, you expect us to believe that a minor species, one barely capable of interstellar travel, has somehow shaken you?" His mandibles clicked in amusement. "You who crushed the Varan war host. You who shattered the Akryl Hive fleets. Surely these humans cannot compare." Varnak's eyes locked onto him. "Do you know why the Varan fell?" he asked, his voice now eerily calm. Tilrek hesitated. "Because they underestimated us." Varnak nodded. "And do you know why the Akryl Hive perished?" Tilrek's confidence wavered. "Because we outmaneuvered them." Varnak exhaled slowly. "Yes. Because we were superior. Because they followed the rules of war we understood. Because their strategies, their tactics, their instincts, we had seen them before." He leaned forward, his gaze like molten gold. "But humans do not fight like anything I have ever seen." The war room was utterly silent now. Even the more skeptical officers shifted uneasily. "They should have died," Varnak continued, his voice growing colder. "By every law of battle, they should have perished within moments." He let the words sink in before continuing. "Let me tell you a story. It began on a backwater moon. A simple skirmish. Varnak's fleet had intercepted a small band of Terran rebels. Insurgents, really not even soldiers. A dozen humans, stranded and alone, their ship destroyed, their weapons primitive. We offered them surrender," Varnak said. His tone made it clear that surrender was never truly an option. "They refused." He let out a slow breath. "So we hunted them." His forces, elite Dominion shock troops, had descended upon them. The humans had no vehicles, no armor. They had no hope. Or so he had thought. "They split apart immediately," Varnak recounted. "Moving unpredictably, using terrain, using deception. They were slower than us, weaker, but they did not run like prey. They ran like something else entirely. Like predators," Zyril murmured. Varnak nodded. "Yes. But not just any predators." His yellow eyes flickered with something deeper. They ran like creatures that had been hunted before, and had learned to hunt back. The Dominion troops had given chase. One by one the humans were cornered. And that was when the nightmare began. "They did not fight to win," Varnak said. "They fought to punish." One of his warriors had caught a lone human, a smaller female, separated from the others. The soldier had prepared to finish her, but the moment he reached her, she laughed. A shiver passed through the room. "What?" Commander Zyril frowned. Varnak's jaw clenched. "She laughed. As if she had already won." His warrior hesitated for half a second. And in that moment the human struck. She did not flee. She did not beg. She attacked with the fury of a dying star. With nothing but a blade, the human had slashed out his soldier's throat before he could react. A fatal strike, precise and merciless. And that was only the beginning. The humans did not fight like prey. They did not fight like an army. They fought like monsters wearing the skin of men. They used their own wounded as bait. They drew my troops into dead ends, into darkness, into their own graves. And one by one my warriors stopped being hunters. And started becoming hunted. Varnak's voice grew distant. There were only 12 of them, he said. 12 against an army of 100. He exhaled slowly, his massive frame tense. When the battle ended, 5 of them remained. He lifted his gaze, scanning his officers. And do you know how many of my warriors survived? No one spoke. Varnak's voice was like thunder in the void. 4. The silence was absolute. Commander Zyral's claws flexed involuntarily. 12 humans had nearly wiped out an entire battalion of Zorthian warriors. How? Zyral breathed. Varnak's gaze darkened. Because humans do not fight to survive. His voice was almost a whisper now. They fight to end you. A shudder passed through the war room. Even the most hardened officers felt it. Varnak straightened. His massive form cast a long shadow over them all. We have warred across the stars for centuries, he said. We have faced species that tower over us, creatures with weapons beyond comprehension. He let the words settle. But I have never seen anything more terrifying than a human with nothing left to lose. The war room was silent. Then, a single officer, one of the youngest, swallowed hard and asked the only question that mattered. My general, what do we do now? Varnak's eyes burned like dying suns. We pray, he said. Because the humans are coming. The war room remained utterly silent. General Varnak's words had left an undeniable mark on every officer in the chamber. The idea that a species as unassuming as humans could decimate an elite Zorthian battalion with nothing but deception and brutality was impossible. And yet it had happened. Commander Zyral's mandibles clicked softly in the tense quiet. He was no fool. Varnak had never exaggerated in his life. If he spoke of a terror unseen, it was real. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Subcommander Tilrek dared to break the silence. My general, if they are truly so dangerous, why do they not rule the stars already? A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. It was a valid question. If the humans could fight like demons, outthink elite warriors and kill without hesitation, then why did the Dominion still exist? Varnak let out a slow breath. Because, he said grimly, humans are not conquerors. Tilrek's brow furrowed. That does not make sense. Varnak met his gaze. They do not fight for empire. They do not wage war for dominance. He leaned forward, his massive claws tapping against the war table. They fight when they are pushed. When they are cornered. He paused, eyes narrowing. And when they do not stop. The war that should have been won. Varnak's voice lowered, his tone darkening. Our forces have seen many wars. We are trained for overwhelming strikes, for decisive victories. But we have never fought an enemy like the Terrans. He turned his gaze to a holographic display at the center of the chamber. A red marker pulsed in the void, a tiny, insignificant speck in Dominion space. Arthos 4. Commander Zyral stiffened. He knew the name well. It had been a routine invasion. The Zorthian Dominion had crushed hundreds of worlds before, and Arthos 4 had been marked as unprepared, underdefended, and strategically worthless. It was supposed to be over in a single cycle, Varnak said. Our fleets descended, our troops landed. We should have wiped them out. He looked up, his expression unreadable. But instead, we entered a nightmare. The room darkened as the holographic display shifted, showing recorded footage from the invasion. The Zorthian shock troops had landed in full force. Armored soldiers, advanced walkers, aerial support. The humans had nothing that could match the Dominion's power. At least that's what they had thought. The footage flickered. The first assault was textbook. Zorthian forces swept across the city streets, encountering minimal resistance. The humans fell back, abandoning their buildings, seemingly retreating into the underground tunnels. It was a trap, Varnak said coldly. The next clip showed burning wreckage. Entire squads of Zorthian soldiers missing. Elite mechs reduced to smoking carcasses. The humans had drawn them in, and then collapsed entire buildings on top of them. They had lured the Dominion forces into choke points, used the city itself as a weapon. Varnak clenched his jaw. Every time we thought we had them, they were already 2 steps ahead. One clip showed a Terran squad ambushing a Zorthian outpost. The humans moved without hesitation, without fear. They fought in complete silence, striking like ghosts. No honor-bound combat. No drawn-out engagements. They destroyed supplies, sabotaged armor, assassinated commanders. They made every death feel personal. Zyril felt his stomach tighten. They made us fear the dark, Varnak murmured. The next set of footage was worse. Dominion forces found their own soldiers, trapped, disarmed, but left alive. They left messages, Varnak said quietly. The footage zoomed in on blood-smeared walls. On Zorthian corpses lined up in disturbing, deliberate formations. One message, scrawled in alien letters, translated to, "You should have left." Tilrek's mandibles clicked in discomfort. Why would they do this? Varnak's gaze was heavy. Because humans do not fight for victory. They fight to make you regret starting the war. They never stop coming. The worst part? Varnak said after a moment, his voice quieter now. They should have run out of soldiers. Zyril frowned. What? Varnak exhaled. Their casualties should have broken them. We killed thousands in the first few weeks. No species can sustain losses like that. He turned his gaze back to the hologram. And yet they kept coming. Zyril's hands tightened. No, that wasn't possible. Any army, would begin to fall apart after such heavy losses. Morale would break, discipline would crumble. Even the Dominion's strongest warriors had limits. Varnak's expression darkened. Not humans. They do not stop. Even when they are wounded, even when they are dying. They keep coming. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. We do not know how to fight an enemy that refuses to acknowledge defeat. The silence in the war room was suffocating. And then, finally, Zyril whispered the one question that truly mattered. How do we stop them? Varnak's answer was chilling. I don't think we can. The impossible truth. They are coming, Varnak said, standing tall, his deep voice now filled with something the other officers had never heard before. Not fear. Not anger. Something far worse. Respect. Their homeworld is not built on conquest, Varnak said. It is built on struggle. It is built on a history of war, of survival at all costs. He turned, looking over every officer in the chamber. We have never fought a species that was born in pain and forged in war. He exhaled. And now we have pushed them too far. Tilrek swallowed. You mean? Varnak's yellow eyes burned. The humans have seen us. And now they are preparing. He let the words settle before delivering the final blow. We have never feared an enemy before. A long pause. But this time, we should. The war room remained utterly still. Every officer felt the truth in those words. And far away beyond the Dominion's borders, an unseen force was already stirring. Humanity had endured. And now humanity was coming. The Zorthian Dominion had always been the predator. They had crushed empires, shattered civilizations, and left entire species extinct in their relentless march across the stars. But now, for the first time in their history, they were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. The bridge of the Dominion warship Vratak was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of deep space sensors. Commander Zyril stood rigid, his dark chitinous plating gleaming under the dim red glow of the ship's battle lights. Around him, his officers worked in grim silence, their clawed hands moving over displays, tracking every anomaly in the void ahead. They knew what was coming. Humans. The Dominion had waged war for centuries, but they had never prepared for this. For an enemy that did not fight for conquest or dominance, but for vengeance. A cold, reptilian voice broke the silence. Sir. We have movement? Zyril turned sharply. Where? The officer hesitated. Everywhere. The war map flickered, showing hundreds of blips moving through the void. Fast. Coordinated. It was impossible. How did they get this close? Zyril demanded. Where is the perimeter fleet? The outposts? His second-in-command, a lean, scarred veteran named Karek, grimaced. We lost contact with Outpost 32 an hour ago. Outpost 33 is silent. The fleet at Rithan 6 went dark 3 cycles ago. Zyril's mandibles clicked in disbelief. And we received no distress calls? No, sir. That was impossible. The Dominion's fleets were powerful, vast. Their outer defenses should have seen this coming. Instead, they had been blinded. Zyril turned toward the main viewport, staring into the cold black abyss of space. And then, in the far distance, he saw them. Tiny specks of light, moving fast, weaving between the stars, like shadows cutting through the void. Human warships. And behind them, something else. They never stopped fighting. The Terran fleet surged forward like a storm, silent, relentless. And then, without warning, the void itself exploded. A wave of electromagnetic pulses swept across the Dominion fleet, scrambling sensors, blacking out communications. Zyro barely had time to react before the first wave of human strike craft dove through the chaos like hungry beasts, their weapons carving into the Dominion's hulls before they even had time to return fire. Shields failing, an officer screamed. Zyro's claws dug into the command panel. How? They're everywhere. Moving faster than we can lock on. And then the human ground team struck. The Dominion had always been prepared for planetary assaults, not ships being boarded mid-battle. But humans did not care about Dominion rules. They cut into warships like they were prey. One moment, the bridge of the Zorthian cruiser Zektul was calm. The next, human soldiers in reinforced combat suits breached the hull, storming inside like ghosts made of steel and fury. Dominion warriors barely had time to react before they were gunned down with ruthless precision. Not overkill. Not savagery. Efficiency. There was no shouting. No wasted movement. Humans moved like they had done this 1,000 times before. Like this wasn't war to them. Like it was simply another hunt. The horror spreads. Commander Zyro's body tensed as alarms blared across the fleet. We're being boarded. That shouldn't have been possible. The Dominion had shields, powerful shields, and defensive measures. The humans shouldn't have been able to breach them this fast. And yet, they're inside. Zyro's mind raced. The humans had already adapted. They had studied Dominion tactics, learned their weaknesses and exploited them without hesitation. His claws curled into a fist. Activate ship-wide defenses. Deploy all security teams. But it was too late. Because the humans were already here. The unstoppable force. Zyro barely had time to draw his blade before the bridge doors exploded inward. A human stepped through the smoke. Tall. Armored. But it wasn't the armor that made Zyro freeze. It was the eyes. Cold. Calculating. Not the eyes of a soldier. The eyes of a predator. A weapon aimed. Zyro lunged first. He was fast. Faster than humans should be able to react. But before he even moved an inch, a shot rang out. And he felt nothing below his waist. Zyro collapsed. His body refused to obey him. His vision blurred as he looked down. His legs were gone. A perfect, precise shot had severed his spine. Not a kill shot. Not yet. The human had done it on purpose. A lesson. Zyro gasped, coughing up blood. He forced his head up, meeting the human's gaze. The Terran did not speak. Did not gloat. He simply raised his weapon again. Zyro did not beg. He was Zorthian. He was Dominion. But before the human pulled the trigger, Zyro finally understood. This was never about winning for them. This was about making sure the enemy could never fight again. And then, darkness. The beginning of the end. Far above the battle, aboard the Dominion War Council, General Varnak stood before the holographic projections of his people's greatest leaders. His voice was grave. Our fleets are falling. Our warriors are being hunted. He took a slow breath. We underestimated them. We assumed their smaller numbers meant weakness. We believed their lack of territory made them insignificant. His yellow eyes burned. We were wrong. A high-ranking Dominion official sneered. You expect us to surrender? To kneel before primitives? Varnak exhaled. They are not primitives. He looked down at the star map. One by one, Dominion-controlled worlds were going dark. Humanity was not just retaliating. They were dismantling the Empire, one warship, one planet, one battle at a time. Varnak's claws curled into a fist. We thought we were the apex predators of the galaxy. He turned, staring directly into the eyes of the assembled War Council. But the humans, they were forged in fire. A long pause. The question is no longer can we defeat them? He stepped forward. The question is, how long can we survive? The council chamber was silent. And far beyond the Dominion's borders, the human fleet pressed onward. Not to conquer. Not to occupy. But to end the war. Permanently. The Dominion War Council had never known fear. Not when they had razed planets. Not when they had crushed empires. Not when they had stood at the edge of the galaxy, unchallenged and supreme. But now, as they listened to General Varnak's final words, fear was all they had left. The war is over, he said, his voice heavy. We just don't know it yet. The council chamber was silent. No one argued. No one denied the truth, because deep in their cores they all knew. The humans were not here to negotiate. They were here to finish it. The walls of the Empire crumble. The capital world of the Dominion, Zorth Prime, had stood untouched for thousands of cycles. It was the seat of their power, the heart of their military might. No enemy had ever set foot on its soil. Until today. Far above the planet, the last remnants of the Zorthian fleet burned, warships shattered like glass, torn apart by relentless human strikes. The orbital defense stations had fallen. The planetary shield was collapsing. And through the thinning clouds, like falling stars, the Terran ground forces descended. The last stand. Commander Zyril had always imagined his death would be honorable. That he would die fighting a worthy enemy, blade to blade, in the glorious chaos of war. Instead, he lay half-conscious in the ruins of the Dominion's high command, his body barely functioning, blood pooling beneath him. The first explosions had torn through the city only an hour ago. Now the humans were everywhere. Their dropships had landed in the heart of Zorth Prime, deploying soldiers with eerie precision. Not reckless, not panicked. They fought with cold purpose. And worst of all, they did not speak. Zorthian warriors screamed their war cries, calling for glory, for vengeance. The humans answered only with fire and steel. Zyril gasped, his vision blurring. His one remaining arm struggled to pull himself up. Through the smoke, through the flames. He saw them. The last defenders of the Dominion. The palace guards. The elite forces. Hundreds of warriors, their best, standing between the humans and the Grand Council. And before them, stepping through the fire, the Terran soldiers. Their armor was blackened from battle, their weapons still dripping with the blood of the fallen. And they did not hesitate. The final battle of the Dominion lasted less than 10 minutes. The humans moved like reapers, precise, brutal, unstoppable. Every shot counted. Every strike killed. The Zorthians fought with desperation, their warriors willing to die for the last shreds of their empire. But it did not matter. Because the humans had already decided. There would be no empire left to save. The Emperor's final mistake. In the deepest chamber of the palace, High Emperor Zoltan sat frozen on his throne. He had been so sure, so certain that this would not happen. That his empire would last forever. That no species could ever challenge the Dominion. But now his empire was ash. His people were dying. And outside his chamber, the doors trembled under the force of something unstoppable. Boom, boom, boom. With each impact, the mighty doors that had stood for thousands of years cracked. And then they shattered. They walked in. A dozen Terran soldiers, their weapons raised, their movements calm, methodical, inevitable. The High Emperor's breath came in ragged, trembling gasps. He tried to speak, to bargain, to offer anything to stop what was about to happen. But when he looked into their eyes, he realized something far worse than death. They did not care. They were not here to rule. They were not here to claim his throne. They were not here for power. They were here to erase him. One of the soldiers, the leader, stepped forward. He said nothing. And then, the final shot rang out. The end of the Dominion. Across the galaxy, Dominion-held worlds flickered offline. Fleets abandoned their posts. Generals laid down their weapons. The war that had raged for decades ended in a single day. And as the last remnants of the Zorthian Empire crumbled into the void, one truth became clear. Humanity had not come to conquer. They had come to make sure the Dominion never rose again. And they had succeeded. Aftermath, the fear that remained. Years later, in the dark corners of the universe, in the shattered remnants of what had once been the mighty Dominion, the stories persisted. They spoke in hushed whispers, terrified voices. They told of a war unlike any other. They told of a species that should have been weak. A species that should have been prey. A species that refused to die. And they warned each other, again and again, of the one unbreakable law that now ruled the galaxy. Never provoke the humans. Epilogue, Varnak's final words. Years after the fall of the Dominion, General Varnak sat alone in exile. He had survived, though sometimes he wished he hadn't. He had seen it all. Felt the weight of it. And when the young warriors of new rising powers came to him, seeking wisdom, asking, "Tell us the truth. Tell us what truly destroyed the Dominion," Varnak would simply look up, his yellow eyes burning with a haunted, terrible truth. And he would whisper, "We thought we understood war. Until we fought the humans."